Alright, welcome back. Now, our Type C climates have a more awkward name. It says moist subtropical mid-latitude climates. Let me tell you the story about that name. Remember, Köppen worked all this stuff in German. In German, the expression is slightly different, and it kind of got roughly translated to this moist subtropical. The name is not what's important. What I want you to know is about sea climates. Look where they are. We're talking Southeast United States, the Mediterranean, China, big chunks of Australia. Type C climates are places that have a distinct winter. There's definitely a winter in Southeast United States, but it's relatively mild. On the other hand, what Type C climates definitely have is a warm, muggy summer. These are humid places with hot, warm summers. Think any place that's kind of a big marsh or a swamp. These are going to be, the bayous of Louisiana, the swamps of northern Florida or southern Georgia or something like that. These are all going to be good examples of Type C climates. The plants that live there, they can survive a freeze, not a particularly hard freeze, but a freeze, and they have a lot of warm, moist weather in the summer. If we looked at a map of the United States, Type C climates actually cover pretty much the entire southeast United States, extending from like Houston through like Louisiana, up through Kentucky, over to like North Carolina. That's all Type C climates. Now I don't know how well you can read the little key here in this video, but there's another part of the country that's got Type C climates, and that's basically all of California, at least coastal California. But that's a slightly different type of Type C climate. Again, remember, Köppen actually divided this all up into lots and lots of subtypes and so on. That's actually what we call a Mediterranean climate, named from the fact that a lot of like Italy and France and Spain have a very similar type. Greece, these places have very similar climates to what they have in California. A Mediterranean climate is sort of the opposite of a monsoon climate. A Mediterranean climate has a dry summer and a wet winter. Remember, monsoon regions have a dry winter and a wet summer. So places like California, it never rains in the summer in California. Certainly not, anywhere except like right along the very southern parts of California. If you live in like San Francisco or something, it never rains in the summer. And then in the winter is where they get all their precipitation. So Type C climates are going to be, they've got a winter, but it's relatively mild. They got a warm, muggy summer. Type D climates, on the other hand, are moist climates with harsh winters. Looking at this map that has some examples of Type D climates, you can see basically we're talking the northern and northeastern United States, basically all of Canada, basically all of northern Europe, basically all of like Siberia. These, notice they're all in the northern hemisphere. Let me give you a key vocabulary word here. This is another good example of a biome, taiga. T-A-I-G-A, taiga. Taiga is northern forest, pine tree forest or deciduous forest when the trees drop their leaves. Taiga is a good way to describe the environment in a location that has a Type D climate. They have very harsh winters. Most of Alaska, most of northern Canada, southern Canada, most of New England, most of the Midwest. Wait a minute, the Midwest, we'll get there. These are all places that have forests, either pine forest or deciduous forest, and they all have pretty severe winters. The plants that live there, especially the trees and stuff, have to be able to survive really harsh winters with really severe conditions. Very cold, very dry, potentially a lot of snowfall that would be damaging to the plants, it brings down branches and so on. But it also describes places that were once a forest. I mean, the fact that mankind has come along, settlers came along and cut down all the forests in the Midwest, doesn't change the fact that we have a Type D climate. I mean, just because we decided we'd rather not have a forest here, we'd rather have a field of wheat, doesn't change the fact that it's still a Type D climate. If we look across a map at all the different parts of the United States that have Type D climate, you can see that it extends across the Corn Belt, Midwest, the upper Midwest like Minnesota and so on, all through New England, etc. These are all examples of Type D climate. Before settlers arrived, all of these regions had, were forests, were giant oak savannas and things like that. Today, of course, most of them are fence row corn and soybean and hay and stuff like that. Now I want to show you a slide that we saw earlier in this presentation here. I showed you this before, and I told you this stuff about Type B climates and how Type B climates don't necessarily get all that much precipitation, and even if they do, it just evaporates because it's warm. Honestly, most of these places with the type D climates don't get a lot of precipitation either. You know, I don't know, North Dakota maybe gets like 20 inches of rain a year. You know, southern Canada maybe gets like 15 inches of rain a year. That's not really all that much rain. It's comparable to the amount of rain they get in, say, Phoenix. How come 15 inches of rain in Phoenix is saguaro cactuses, and 15 inches of rain in Montreal supports a forest? What's the difference here? Well, it's all about the temperature here. I mean, even though type D climates are about the same amount of moisture as a type, often anyway, the same amount of moisture as a type B climate, it's just a lot colder. And temperature controls the rate of evaporation. So even though, you know, Alaska might get 8 inches of rain a year, very little of that evaporates. It all soaks into the ground to be used to make trees. And so 8 inches of rain supports a forest in central Alaska. 8 inches of rain would even be dry in Phoenix. I mean, they get more than that per year. So even though there's a relatively limited amount of water, the low temperatures mean that they can actually support more plant life, like trees and stuff like that, in these type D climates. This is why even just a few inches of rain can support basically no life in the Sahara, but might support something like a pine forest in Alaska. Precipitation, in other words, is not the whole story when it comes to climate. It's a combination of precipitation and temperature. It's about how much of the precipitation doesn't get evaporated and gets used by the plants. Okay. Type E climates are the polar climates. If you look at the map here, they're exactly where you think they're going to be. Northern Canada, the North Slope of Alaska, Greenland, places like that. I don't have Antarctica on here, but obviously Antarctica has a polar climate. A couple different kinds of biomes in polar climate, like ice caps. Ice caps are, you know, exactly what you might say. They're glaciers and ice caps out on the ocean. Basically no plant life. I mean, yes, there might be lichens or bacteria or something like that, but basically no plant life is living on the ice cap itself. That's in contrast to tundra. Now, I got a dictionary definition of tundra out that said that it's a vast treeless region in which the subsoil is permanently frozen. That, by the way, the word for that permanently frozen subsoil is permafrost. The top couple inches of the soil will thaw out and plants can grow in the summer, but once you dig down even a few feet, it's permanently frozen in a tundra. Now, I don't know if I love that definition of tundra because I don't necessarily think tundra has to be flat, for example, but you know what tundra is. I mean, it's this sort of broad areas of like northern Canada, the North Slope of Alaska, etc., where during the summer the soil thaws out a little bit. You get like wildflowers and dwarf trees and things like that. Caribou come and eat it, and flocks of birds come to make their nests, and yeah, it's their breeding grounds and stuff. But then, you know, 9 months out of the year, it's all frozen wasteland. Okay, so that would be tundra. I like this picture, by the way, here that shows the, you know, they did a dig through here, and you can see how after you get down a couple inches, the soil is clearly frozen. The soil is permanently frozen in a type D climate. I'm sorry, type E climate, if it's tundra. All right, now, there's one more climate type I want to show you, and I didn't want to show you the global map of this. I like this U.S. map instead. On the U.S. map here, we have the area that is shaded in there that has a type H climate. I don't know why Köppen went from E to H. Maybe there wasn't originally an F and a G, I don't know. H, though, is the Highland climates. And Highland climates are much more variable. You know, if you go up and, if you climb a mountain, at the base of the mountain, it might be fairly, there's probably forests, there's probably grasses, there's probably wildflowers, but as you get higher and higher up the mountain, over a relatively small region, you're going to start coming across different kinds of environments. It's going to get drier, it might get more moist, it might get drier. An important vocabulary word when you're talking about Highland climates is trees anymore. Chaparral is a word that a lot of people very different biomes, but they're not really sure how to use it. Lump that all chaparral is vegetation containing chiefly thickets and thorny bushes. A lot of times Highland climates are characterized by this sort of chaparral. It grows real quick, so year-to-year variability, if it's a little drier or a little colder and some plants died out, the chaparral tends to grow in quickly. So, you know, like if you're thinking of like a cowboy movie where the cowboy is headed up through the mountains and there's all these scrubby bushes and stuff like that, that's chaparral. That's often the biome that you encounter in a type H climate. You know, there's a lot of vocabulary in this lecture, I gotta say. As I was just thinking about this, I was like, man, we gotta talk about jungles, rainforests, savanna, desert, steppe, tundra, taiga, permafrost, ice cap, chaparral, etc. The good news is, my experience is ATS 113 students love vocabulary. That tends to be what they're good at. Not that it's easy, but that they know how to study that kind of stuff, and that's good. Now, one more classic thing that we have to always ask about when we talk about climate zones like this is we say, well, what is the climate then of Nebraska? Well, if you look back at those maps that we were talking about before, you probably noticed that Nebraska is actually dominated by two different climate types. The eastern half is clearly a type D climate. Eastern Nebraska was at one time forested. I mean, you can still see examples of the forest if you go down to like in Bellevue, Fontenelle Forest, up down there. You know, look around Omaha, look at the bluffs of Council Bluffs and so on. Clearly forests grow in eastern Nebraska. They're not, most of eastern Nebraska isn't forest anymore because it was long since cut down and then made into cornfields and alfalfa fields and so on. But type D is a good way to describe the climate of eastern Nebraska. It's very harsh winters with either mild or severe summers. But if you get farther west in Nebraska, you start encountering type B climates. Most of western half of Nebraska is a good example of a shortgrass prairie or a steppe. It has a mild to severe summer, but it has very cold winters and it has relatively little precipitation. The western half of Nebraska gets about half as much rain as the eastern half does. I was recently actually out a few hours west of Omaha, and I took some little video just to illustrate. This is actually near Ashfall State Historical Site. Go there if you ever get a chance. Cool stuff. But in general, you get a sense of what the shortgrass prairie areas, the steppe areas of western Nebraska look like. If you get farther out west, you even get to the sandhills, which is just crazy awesome stuff. But, you know, the farther west you go in Nebraska, the fewer trees there are, the shorter the grasses are, the drier the climate gets. It's clearly a type B climate. Okay, before we leave, I want to ask one last question to see if you're understanding what's going on. It says, Indiana is farmland now, but most of the state was covered with forest before the arrival of settlers 200 years ago. Most of Indiana would then be described as having a type blank climate. Look at your choices, pick one, click on the link below this video to get some feedback about your answer.